This is the part 4 of lecture 2. Here we will discuss system structure. In this lecture, we will discuss system structure. We know that operating system is a large and complex system. In order to function properly, we have to divide this large system into small components. That is, we have to partition the task into smaller components, and each part should be well defined, as well as it should have a proper input, well defined function, and a proper output. Then only it can be treated as a well defined component. We have discussed the components present in the operating system in the previous lecture. Now we will discuss how these operating system components are interconnected. And initially, many commercial systems do not have a well defined structure. Then the operating system started as a small, simple, and limited system, and then grew beyond their original scope. MS-DOS are an example of such a system. MS-DOS has a very simple structure. Actually, the developers of MS-DOS do not know that it would become so popular. Actually, the MS-DOS was written to provide the most functionality in the least space. That is, the hardware requirement for the MS-DOS was very limited, and it was not divided into modules. It had some structure, that is, MS-DOS had some structure, but its interfaces and levels of functionality are not well separated. The structure of MS-DOS is shown. It has a layered structure. That is, the lowest level is ROM BIOS device drivers, and above that we have MS-DOS device drivers, and above that resident system programs were loaded, and above that application programs will be running. Unix is another system that was initially limited by hardware functionality. The original Unix operating system had limited structuring. The Unix OS consists of two separable parts, that is, system programs and the kernel. We can view the traditional Unix operating system as shown in the figure. Here it is shown as a layered structure. Everything below the system call interface and above the kernel interface. Everything below the system call interface, and this is the kernel interface to the hardware. So this thing, okay, this can be considered as, that is, everything below the system called interface, and everything above the hardware can be treated as the kernel. And this kernel provides mechanisms like file system management, CPU scheduling, memory management, and other operating system functions through system calls. Then system calls provides the API to the Unix. The system calls are the set of programs commonly available, and they define the user interface also. The programmer and the user interfaces define the context that the kernel must support. Then actually the new versions of Unix are designed to use more advanced hardware, and if we are giving proper hardware support, operating system may be broken into pieces that are more smaller and more appropriate than this type of Unix and MS-DOS structures. The operating system can then retain much greater control over the computer and over the applications that make use of that computer. So we can go for a more advanced layered concept regarding this operating system structure. Here we are going for a layered approach. The operating system is divided into a number of layers or levels, each built on top of lower layers. The bottom layer or layer 0 is the hardware, and the highest level or layer n is the user interface. That is, all other layers will be in between this bottom layer and top layer. With modularity, layers are selected such that each uses functions or operations and services of only lower level layers. Okay, that is, each layer is an implementation of abstract object, that is the encapsulation of data and of the operations that can manipulate those data. A typical operating system layer is shown in figure. Here layer M is depicted. Below that we have layer M-1. Layer M will define some new operations, and it will use the operations defined by layer M-1. That is, layer M-1 is just below layer M. So it has some existing operations. So we can use that existing operations, and other operations are, that is, newer operations will only be defined in layer M. The main advantage of the layered approach is modularity. The layers are selected such that each uses functions and services of only lower level layers. In this figure also we can see that Layer M uses the services provided by layer M-1. Actually, the advantage of this approach is that it simplifies debugging and system verification. The first layer can be debugged first. That is, whenever we are debugging, the first layer can be debugged without any concern for the rest of the system, because by definition it uses only the basic hardware which is assumed to be correct. We know that basic hardware is implemented correctly, so first layer can be debugged without any concern of anything. Once the first layer is debugged, its correct functioning can be assumed while the second layer is debugged. That is, while we are debugging the second layer, we know that first layer is already debugged and it is correct, so we can concentrate on the second layer only. If an error is found during the debugging of a particular layer, the error must be on that layer, not on the lower level layers. That we can assume, or that we can ensure. Another advantage is a layer does not need to know how these operations are implemented in the lower layers. It needs to know only what these operations do. That is, each layer hides some. That is, it is shown in the figure. That is, layer M-1 is hiding some operations in an abstract way. That is, some type of operations and some data structures and hardware is hidden from other layers. Now we'll discuss the difficulties associated with this layered approach. The major difficulty with the layered approach involves the careful definition of the layer. That is, we should define each layer carefully, because a layer can use only those layers below it. So, for example, when the device driver for the disk space used by virtual memory algorithm must be at a level lower than that of memory management routines, because memory management requires the ability to use the disk space. So, memory management should be above the virtual manager or virtual management scheme. That hierarchy should be followed while designing these layers. And final problem with the layered implementation is that they tend to be less efficient than other types. That is, for instance, when a user program executes an IO operation, it executes a system call that is trapped to the IO layer first, which calls the memory management layer, which in turn calls the CPU scheduling layer, which is then passed to the hardware. At each layer, the parameters may be modified, data may need to be passed, and so on. Each layer adds overhead to the system code. So the net result is a system code that it takes longer than does one on a non-layered system. Here, the request can only be passed through these much layers, so an overhead is there. That should be taken into mind. Now we will discuss microkernel system structure. We know that as the Unix operating system expanded, the kernel became large and difficult to manage. So in the 1980s, researchers developed an operating system called Mac, and that modularizes the kernel using the microkernel approach. Actually, in this method, structures the operating system by removing all non-essential components from the kernel and implementing them as system and user level programs. That is, we will take the kernel as, we will keep the kernel as a smaller one. So the main function of the microkernel is to provide communication facility between the client program and the various services that are also running in user space. So the communication is provided by message passing. For example, if the client program wishes to access a file, it must interact with the file server. The client program and the service never interact directly. Rather, they communicate indirectly by exchanging messages via the microkernel. And the major advantages or benefits associated with the microkernel structure are, it is easier to expand. That is, the microkernel is easier to expand or extend. All new services are added to the user space and consequently do not require any modification of the kernel. When the kernel does not have to be modified, the changes tend to be fewer because the microkernel is the smaller kernel. The resulting operating system is easier to port from one hardware to another. Then the microkernel also provides more security and reliability since it is a small core. Then most services are running as user rather than kernel processes. If a service fails, the rest of the operating system remain untouched. That is the advantage of microkernel approach. Several contemporary operating systems have used the microkernel approach like True 64 Unix, Then it provides a Unix interface to the user, but it is implemented with a Mac kernel. The Mac kernel maps Unix system calls to messages to the appropriate user level services. The Apple Mac OS X server operating system is based on the Mac kernel. Then QNX is a real-time operating system that is also based upon the microkernel design. The QNX microkernel provides services for message passing and process scheduling. It also handles low-level network communication and hardware interrupts. All other services in QNX are provided by standard processes that run outside the kernel in user mode. Here, an example of Windows NT structure is shown, that is client server structure of Windows NT is shown here. A Win32 application will be there and a Win32 server is there. The application will place a request through the kernel to the server and the server will respond to it. The aspect of modern operating system is a collection of system programs. System programs provide a convenient environment for program development and execution. In the first lecture, we have seen the logical computer hierarchy, the logical layout we have seen. In that figure, at the lowest level, hardware was shown. Then next is the operating system, then the system programs, and finally the application programs. Programs provide a convenient environment for program development and execution. Some of them are simply user interfaces to system calls, others are more complex. So they can be divided into following categories like file manipulation, status information, file modification, programming language support, program loading and execution, communications, and application programs. Most users' view of the operation system is defined by system programs, not the actual system calls. So we will discuss each one in detail. That is, what is file management? File management, as we know, uh, these programs create, delete, copy, rename, print, dump, list, and generally manipulate files and directories. So the responsibility of file system programs are to manipulate files. They should help in create, delete, and such activities should be manipulated by the file management system programs. Second is status information. In status information, some programs simply ask the system for the date, time, amount of available memory or disk space, number of users, or similar status information formatted and is printed to the terminal or other output device or file. That is controlled by the status information system program. So next is file modification. File modification, we know that several text editors may be available to create and modify the content of files stored on disk or tape. Text editors are managed by this file modification system programs. Then come programming language support. This programming language support softwares you are familiar, like compilers, assemblers, and interpreters for common programming languages like C, C++, Java, Visual Basic, and Perl, and are often provided to the user with the operating system. Nowadays, some of these programs are priced and provided separately. Then program loading and execution. Program loading and execution is also a major concern that also you are familiar with. Once a program is assembled or compiled, it must be loaded into memory to be executed. Otherwise, it will be just a program. Okay, that is written in some text editors. So once it is ready and it should be assembled first, then it should be compiled, then it should be loaded into memory. The system may provide absolute loaders, relocatable loaders, then linkage editors, and overlay loaders. All these support should be there. Support from all these softwares should be there. Then debugging systems for either higher level languages or machine languages are also needed at this stage. So these are done by the program loading and execution system programs. Then comes communications. These programs provide the mechanism for creating virtual connections among processes. That is, processes need to be communicate with each other and provide facility for communication among users and different computer systems. That is, some machines may be connected with the machine with over a network. That is, there will be a set of machines connected over a network. So that communication should also be maintained by this communication software. Allow users to send messages to one another's screen, to browse web pages, to send electronic mail messages, to log in remotely, or to transfer files from one machine to another. So all these functions are handled by communication system programs. Most operating systems are supplied with programs that solve common problems or perform common operations. Such programs include web browsers, word processors, and text formatters, spreadsheets, database systems, compilers, plotting and statistical analysis packages will be there, and games were also installed in such systems. These programs are known as system utilities or application programs. So, the most important system program for an operating system is the command interpreter, the main function of which is to get and execute the next user specified command. So, these are the things that we have to discuss with the system programs.